Number 1. Mark Ciavarella Jr. Mark Ciavarella Jr. was a powerful figure in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. As a juvenile court judge, he controlled the fate of children who appeared before him. Parents believed he was enforcing discipline. The public believed he was protecting society. What no one knew at the time was that Ciavarella was using his courtroom as a business. In his court, hearings were fast and intimidating. Many teenagers stood alone without lawyers. Some parents were told legal representation was not necessary. Decisions were made in minutes. Children were often taken away immediately, sometimes crying as they were led out of the room. These were not violent criminals. Many were first-time offenders. Some had committed minor acts like skipping school, talking back to teachers, or being involved in small disputes. Yet, Ciavarella routinely sent them to detention centers instead of giving warnings, probation, or counseling. At the same time, 2 private juvenile detention centers were operating nearby. These centers were run as for-profit businesses. The more children they received, the more money they made. Behind closed doors, Ciavarella had entered into a secret agreement connected to these facilities. Along with another judge, Michael Conahan, Ciavarella helped shut down a publicly funded juvenile detention center. This move forced the county to rely on the private centers instead. In exchange, Ciavarella received large payments. Over time, these payments added up to more than $2 million. Every harsh sentence meant more profit. For years, this system continued without public awareness. Children were locked away. Families suffered. Lives were disrupted. Many teenagers fell behind in school. Some developed long-term emotional trauma. A few ended up deeper in the justice system because of the experience. The truth began to surface when federal investigators started examining financial records tied to the judges. The money trail was impossible to ignore. Wire transfers, shell companies, and hidden payments pointed directly to corruption. In 2008, the story finally broke. The public learned that thousands of juvenile cases had been tainted. Parents were outraged. Legal experts were stunned. A judge entrusted with protecting children had betrayed that trust in one of the worst ways imaginable. Ciavarella was arrested and charged with multiple federal crimes, including racketeering, fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. At first, he claimed innocence. He insisted his sentencing decisions were fair and justified. He said he believed in strict discipline. But the evidence told a different story. During the trial, former victims testified. Parents described watching their children taken away for small mistakes. Experts explained how due process had been ignored. Financial records showed how money flowed directly to Ciavarella as children filled detention beds. In 2011, Mark Ciavarella Jr. was found guilty on multiple counts. The judge who once sentenced children now faced sentencing himself. In 2011, Ciavarella was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read. For many families, it was the first moment of real accountability. Some parents cried, others felt relief. Many said no sentence could undo the damage already done.
My kid's not here! He's dead! Because of him! He ruined my fucking life! I'd like him to go to hell and rot there forever! No, you know what he told everybody in court? They need to be held accountable for their actions. You need to be! Do you remember me? Do you remember me? Do you remember my son? An all-star wrestler? He's gone! He shot himself in the heart! You scumbag! You ruined my fucking life!
More than 4,000 juvenile convictions were later overturned because of his actions. It was one of the largest mass reversals of convictions in U.S. history. Ciavarella was stripped of his law license. His reputation was destroyed. The man who once sat above others in judgment now wore a prison uniform. Even in prison, Ciavarella continued to deny full responsibility. He filed appeals. He asked for reduced sentences. Each attempt failed. The courts ruled that the damage he caused was too severe. The case changed how juvenile courts across the country operated. Safeguards were strengthened. Legal representation became mandatory in many situations. Judges were reminded that their power must always be checked. For the victims, healing was slow. Some former detainees spoke publicly years later, describing how their lives were altered. They talked about fear, confusion, and lost opportunities. Many said they no longer trusted the justice system. Mark Ciavarella Jr. is now remembered not as a judge, but as a warning. A warning of what happens when power is abused. A warning of what happens when justice is sold. A warning that even those who wear robes are not above the law. This was not a failure of one child. It was a failure of a system that trusted the wrong person for too long, and it ended with a judge going to prison for the very crimes he once punished others for. Number 2. Michael Conahan. Michael Conahan was not the judge who handed down the sentences. He was the judge who made sure the system allowed it to happen. As the president judge of Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, Michael Conahan held enormous administrative power. While Mark Ciavarella controlled the juvenile courtroom, Conahan controlled the structure behind it. He approved contracts. He signed agreements. He influenced which facilities the county used to detain young offenders. From the outside, Conahan appeared calm, professional, and respected. He did not shout in court. He did not deliver dramatic sentences. His role was quieter, but far more important. Without Michael Conahan, the Kids for Cash scandal could not have worked. Conahan helped decide where juvenile offenders would be sent after sentencing. At the time, Luzerne County had a publicly funded juvenile detention center. This facility was not perfect, but it was accountable to the county and taxpayers. That facility stood in the way of private profit. Behind closed doors, Conahan worked to shut it down. He signed off on decisions that made the public center unusable. Once it was gone, the county had no choice but to rely on 2 private detention centers that had already been selected. These private centers were not chosen because they were better. They were chosen because they were paying kickbacks. Conahan secretly accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes from the developers and operators of the private detention centers. The money was disguised as legal fees and consulting payments. In reality, it was payment for influence. While children were being sentenced, Conahan was being paid. Unlike Ciavarella, Conahan did not see the children directly. He did not look into their faces. His decisions were made at a desk, with documents and signatures. That distance made the harm easier to ignore, but the impact was just as severe. Thousands of juveniles were sent into detention facilities that existed primarily to make money. Their freedom became part of a business plan. Their mistakes became revenue. Parents had no idea that the judge overseeing the system was secretly benefiting from their children being locked up. For years, no one suspected the truth. The corruption began to unravel when federal investigators noticed unusual financial activity connected to judges in the county, payments that did not make sense, business relationships that raised red flags. Slowly, investigators traced the money back to the detention centers. In 2008, federal prosecutors charged Michael Conahan and Mark Ciavarella with corruption-related crimes. The story shocked the nation. At first, Conahan chose to cooperate. In 2009, he pleaded guilty to racketeering conspiracy. He admitted that he had accepted bribes and abused his position as a judge. He acknowledged that his actions helped enrich private detention centers at the expense of children. Many believed this cooperation would reduce his sentence, but the damage was already done. As more details came out, public outrage grew. Thousands of families learned that their children's cases may have been influenced by money. Legal experts called it one of the worst judicial scandals in U.S. history. Unlike Ciavarella, who fought the charges, Conahan admitted guilt early. Even so, prosecutors argued that his role was essential. Without his approvals and administrative decisions, the scheme could not have succeeded. In 2011, Michael Conahan was sentenced to 17.5 years in federal prison. The sentence was meant to send a clear message. Judges who abuse their power will be held accountable. Position and title offer no protection when justice is corrupted. Conahan was stripped of his judicial position. His law license was revoked. His career ended in disgrace. In court, victims described the system that failed them. Parents spoke about trusting the court, only to later learn it was compromised. Former detainees described fear, isolation, and confusion. Many said their lives were pushed off track at a young age. Thousands of convictions were eventually vacated. Records were cleared. Apologies were issued, but no ruling could restore lost time. Michael Conahan entered prison not as a judge, but as an inmate. His case exposed a dangerous truth. Corruption does not always look aggressive or cruel. Sometimes it looks quiet, administrative, and official. Sometimes it comes from paperwork instead of punishment. The Kids for Cash scandal changed how juvenile courts are monitored across the United States. Oversight increased, transparency improved. Judges were reminded that administrative decisions can be just as powerful as courtroom rulings. Michael Conahan remains a symbol of how authority can be misused when oversight fails. He did not sentence children directly, but he helped build the system that allowed it. Justice, when sold in silence, can cause just as much harm. Number 3. Lance Mason. Lance Mason was once seen as a rising star in Ohio's legal system. He was a former police officer, a practicing attorney, and later a judge on the Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court. To many people, his career looked like a success story. Few could have imagined that he would one day be convicted of murder and die inside a prison cell. Long before Lance Mason became a judge, there were warning signs. In 2014, while he was still an attorney and former law enforcement officer, Mason was charged with brutally assaulting his wife, Aisha Fraser. Prosecutors said he slammed her head against a wall, threatened her, and held her against her will. The attack was serious and left Fraser injured and traumatized. The case quickly drew attention because of Mason's background in law enforcement and the legal system. Many expected a harsh punishment. Instead, something unusual happened. Despite the severity of the assault, Lance Mason received an extremely lenient sentence. He was sentenced to only 15 months in prison, a punishment far lighter than what many ordinary defendants would face for the same crime. The judge who sentenced him cited his good character and professional background. To many observers, it looked like special treatment. After serving his sentence, Mason returned to public life. Shockingly, he was later appointed as a judge. For Fraser, the woman he had attacked, this was terrifying. She publicly expressed fear for her safety, saying she felt the system had failed to protect her. Her fears would later prove justified. After his release, Mason's behavior toward Fraser did not stop. Prosecutors later said he continued to harass and stalk her. Fraser repeatedly told friends and family that she was afraid. She tried to rebuild her life while remaining constantly aware of her former husband's presence. On November 28, 2018, that fear became reality. That morning, Fraser was driving her 2 young daughters to school in Cleveland, Ohio. As she stopped near a school building, Lance Mason approached her car. What happened next was swift and violent. Mason attacked Fraser inside the vehicle. Prosecutors said he stabbed her multiple times in front of their children. The attack was brutal and left no chance for survival. Fraser died at the scene. The children witnessed the attack. Teachers and parents nearby rushed to help, but it was too late. Lance Mason fled the scene, but was quickly arrested by police. The man who once wore a badge and later a judge's robe was now facing the most serious charge imaginable. This time, there would be no leniency. Mason was charged with aggravated murder, kidnapping, and other serious offenses. The case shocked Ohio and reignited public debate about domestic violence, judicial privilege, and accountability. During the trial, prosecutors painted a clear picture of a man who had repeatedly used his power to avoid consequences. They argued that Mason's earlier, light sentence had given him confidence that he was untouchable. Evidence included witness testimony, surveillance footage, and the heartbreaking accounts of Fraser's family. Prosecutors emphasized that the murder occurred in broad daylight, near a school, and in front of children. In 2019, Lance Mason was found guilty of aggravated murder and other charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read. Fraser's family said justice had finally been served, but at an unbearable cost. Many questioned whether her death could have been prevented if the system had acted differently years earlier. Mason was removed from the judiciary and disbarred. His legal career was over. While serving his life sentence, Lance Mason was housed at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution in Ohio. Less than a year later, in February 2020, he was attacked by another inmate and died from his injuries. His death ended his sentence, but it did not end the conversation surrounding his case. The Lance Mason story became a powerful example of what can happen when warning signs are ignored. Advocates for domestic violence victims pointed to the case as proof that abusers in positions of power can be especially dangerous when protected by the system. For many, this case was not just about one man. It was about a system that failed to act decisively when it had the chance. A system that gave a violent offender the benefit of the doubt because of his title. Aisha Fraser is remembered as a mother, a professional, and a woman who tried to move forward after abuse. Her daughters were left without their mother because early warnings were dismissed. Lance Mason went from enforcing the law to breaking it in the most final way possible. His case remains a reminder that justice must be equal for everyone, regardless of status or position. Number 4. Samuel Kent. Samuel Kent was a respected federal judge in Texas. He served on the United States District Court for the Southern District of Texas and had authority over serious federal cases. Lawyers appeared before him with respect. Court staff worked under his supervision. To the public, he represented the dignity and integrity of the federal judiciary. Behind the scenes, however, Samuel Kent was abusing his power. Kent's misconduct did not involve money or bribes. Instead, it involved the people who worked closest to him. Several female court employees later came forward with allegations that Kent had sexually harassed and assaulted them while they were under his authority. According to court records, the behavior happened over a period of years. Employees said Kent made unwanted advances, touched them without consent, and used his position to intimidate them into silence. These were not strangers. These were staff members who depended on their jobs and feared retaliation. For a long time, nothing happened. Many victims said they felt trapped. Reporting a federal judge seemed impossible. Kent controlled their work environment. He signed evaluations. He influenced careers. The power imbalance was extreme. Eventually, the complaints reached federal investigators. The case began quietly, but as details emerged, it became clear that the allegations were serious and credible. In 2008, Samuel Kent was formally charged with sexual assault and related misconduct. The news shocked the legal community. A sitting federal judge was accused of abusing court employees inside the courthouse itself. Kent denied the most serious allegations. He argued that any contact was misunderstood or exaggerated. His legal team fought to keep the case out of open court. As pressure mounted, Kent resigned from the bench. But resignation was not enough. Prosecutors continued their case. Rather than go through a full trial on the sexual assault charges, Kent reached a plea agreement with federal prosecutors. In 2009, he pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice. He admitted that he had lied to investigators and attempted to interfere with the investigation into his conduct. The plea was significant. While it did not include a sexual assault conviction, it confirmed that a federal judge had broken the law to protect himself. During sentencing, prosecutors described Kent's actions as a serious betrayal of trust. They emphasized that his position made his conduct even more harmful. The courthouse, they argued, should be a place of safety and professionalism, not fear. Victim impact statements describe the emotional toll of the abuse. Former employees spoke about anxiety, stress, and long-term trauma. Some said their careers were damaged. Others said they struggled to trust authority figures again. In 2009, Samuel Kent was sentenced to 33 months in federal prison. When he entered prison, Kent became one of the few federal judges in U.S. history to be incarcerated for criminal conduct. The man who once imposed sentences now lived under one. But the case did not end there. Under the U.S. Constitution, federal judges can only be removed through impeachment. Even though Kent had resigned and gone to prison, Congress continued the impeachment process to formally strip him of his judicial status. In 2010, the U.S. House of Representatives impeached Samuel Kent. Shortly afterward, the Senate convicted him. He became the first federal judge ever impeached and convicted for sexual misconduct. The process was symbolic but important. It made clear that resignation and prison time did not erase accountability. Kent served his sentence and was later released. His law license was revoked. His judicial career was permanently ended. He disappeared from public life, his name now associated not with justice, but with abuse of power. The Samuel Kent case forced the federal judiciary to confront uncomfortable truths. It exposed how difficult it was for court employees to report misconduct. It highlighted the lack of oversight when judges abused their authority behind closed doors. After the case, new policies were introduced to improve reporting systems and protect court staff. Training programs were expanded. Confidential complaint processes were strengthened. Still, many observers said the reforms came too late for Kent's victims. This case was not about a momentary lapse in judgment. It was about a pattern of behavior enabled by silence, fear, and unchecked power. It showed how authority, when misused, can cause lasting harm even without physical violence. Samuel Kent's fall from the bench was a reminder that no position is above accountability. The robe does not grant immunity. Respect must be earned, not demanded. His story stands as a warning within the justice system itself. A system designed to protect others must also be willing to police its own. Number 5. Walter Nixon Jr. Walter Nixon Jr. was a federal judge in Mississippi. He served on the United States District Court and was known as an experienced legal figure. As a judge, he was expected to uphold honesty, integrity, and respect for the law. Instead, his career became a landmark example of how even federal judges can be held accountable when they lie under oath. Nixon's legal troubles did not begin in the courtroom where he presided. They began with a federal investigation into corruption involving a local district attorney. During that investigation, Nixon was called to testify before a grand jury. A grand jury is a serious legal setting. Witnesses are placed under oath and required to tell the truth. Lying in that setting is not just unethical, it is a federal crime. Walter Nixon chose not to tell the truth. According to prosecutors, Nixon gave false testimony about conversations he had regarding an attempt to influence a criminal case. Investigators later discovered that his statements were not accurate and directly contradicted other evidence and witness accounts. The issue was not a misunderstanding or poor memory. Prosecutors argued that Nixon knowingly lied to protect himself and others. In 1986, Walter Nixon Jr. was charged with perjury, a crime that strikes at the heart of the justice system. When judges lie under oath, public trust in the courts is deeply damaged. Nixon was tried in federal court, just like any other defendant. During the trial, the jury heard evidence showing that Nixon had made false statements while under oath. The defense argued that Nixon had not intended to lie and that any inaccuracies were unintentional. The prosecution disagreed and presented evidence that showed a clear pattern of deception. The jury found Walter Nixon Jr. guilty of perjury. The verdict was historic. Federal judges are rarely prosecuted and even more rarely convicted. Nixon's conviction sent a clear message that no one is immune from the law. After the conviction, Nixon was sentenced to prison time. The man who once decided the fate of others was now ordered to serve time himself. However, Nixon's case did not end with his criminal conviction. Under the U.S. Constitution, federal judges cannot simply be fired. They must be removed through impeachment by Congress. Because Nixon had been convicted of a serious crime, Congress began impeachment proceedings against him. In 1989, the U.S. House of Representatives impeached Walter Nixon Jr. The charges focused on his perjury conviction and the damage his actions caused to the integrity of the judiciary. The case then moved to the U.S. Senate for trial. One unusual issue arose during the impeachment process. Instead of having the full Senate hear live testimony, a special Senate committee was appointed to review evidence and report back. Nixon objected to this process. He argued that the Constitution required the entire Senate to conduct the trial directly. When the Senate voted to remove him from office, Nixon challenged the decision in court. This challenge led to a major Supreme Court case. In Nixon v. United States, 1993, the Supreme Court ruled that impeachment procedures are a political matter, not something courts can review. The decision confirmed that Congress has the final authority over impeachment trials. As a result, Nixon's removal from office stood. Walter Nixon Jr. became one of the few federal judges in American history to be convicted of a felony, sent to prison, and removed from office through impeachment. After serving his sentence, Nixon was released from prison. His law license was revoked. His judicial career was permanently over. Unlike some judges who faded quietly into retirement, Nixon's name became permanently tied to a Supreme Court ruling and a constitutional precedent. His actions reshaped how impeachment is understood in the United States. Public reaction to the case was mixed. Some people believed Nixon was treated fairly and that the rule of law had been upheld. Others believed the process was harsh. But most agreed on one point: a judge who lies under oath cannot remain on the bench. The Nixon case reinforced the idea that honesty is not optional in the justice system. Courts depend on truth. Judges, more than anyone else, are expected to model that principle. His conviction also highlighted the importance of accountability at the highest levels of government. If judges are allowed to lie without consequence, the entire legal system loses credibility. Walter Nixon Jr. did not commit a violent crime. He did not accept bribes, but his offense was serious because it involved deception at the core of the judicial process. In the end, Nixon went from being a respected federal judge to a convicted felon and prison inmate. His fall was slow, legal, and final. His case remains a reminder that the law applies equally to everyone, including those who interpret it for a living. Number 6. Jack Camp. Jack Camp was a federal judge in Georgia. He served on the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia and was trusted with serious criminal cases, including drug offenses. In his courtroom, defendants stood before him, knowing he had the power to change their lives with a sentence. Outside the courtroom, Jack Camp was breaking the same laws he was sworn to enforce. Camp's problems began quietly. There were no public complaints at first, no courtroom outbursts, and no dramatic accusations. Instead, his downfall started with behavior that raised concerns among federal investigators. While serving as a sitting judge, Camp became involved with illegal drug use. According to court records, he regularly purchased and used cocaine and other illegal substances. This behavior alone was deeply troubling, given his role as a federal judge. But the situation became even more serious. Camp did not just use drugs. He also associated with individuals involved in criminal activity, including a confidential government informant who was secretly working with law enforcement. This informant would later play a key role in Camp's arrest. Unaware that he was being monitored, Camp spoke openly about his drug use. He discussed purchasing drugs and made statements that suggested he believed he was above suspicion. At times, he expressed views that showed a lack of respect for the law he was enforcing. Investigators gathered evidence carefully. Audio recordings captured Camp admitting to drug use and discussing illegal activity. The case slowly built until authorities believed they had enough proof to act. In 2010, Jack Camp was arrested. The arrest of a sitting federal judge stunned the legal community. News outlets across the country reported the story. Many people struggled to understand how a judge who sentenced others for drug crimes could be committing similar offenses himself. Camp was charged with drug-related crimes, including illegal drug use and possession. Facing overwhelming evidence, Camp chose to plead guilty. He admitted to using cocaine and violating federal law. His admission confirmed what investigators had already uncovered. As part of the legal process, Camp resigned from the bench. His resignation ended his judicial career, but it did not end his accountability. In court, prosecutors emphasized the seriousness of his conduct. They argued that judges must follow the law more strictly than anyone else. When judges break the law, public confidence in the justice system is damaged. Camp's defense team asked for leniency. They pointed to his years of service and argued that his crimes were non-violent. They described his actions as personal failures rather than threats to public safety. The judge overseeing the sentencing acknowledged Camp's past service, but made it clear that his position made his crimes more serious, not less. In 2010, Jack Camp was sentenced to 30 days in federal prison, followed by supervised release. While the sentence was relatively short compared to others, the consequences were lasting. Camp lost his career, his reputation, and his position of authority. He went from sentencing others to serving time himself. After his release, Camp disappeared from public life. His law license was revoked. He no longer had any role in the legal system. The case sparked debate across the country. Some believed the sentence was too light, especially given Camp's role in prosecuting and sentencing drug offenders. Others argued that the punishment fit the specific crimes charged. Regardless of opinion, the message was clear. Even federal judges are not immune from criminal prosecution. The Jack Camp case also highlighted concerns about oversight within the judiciary. Many questioned how a judge could engage in illegal drug use while serving on the bench without being detected sooner. In response, judicial oversight and reporting mechanisms were reviewed. The case became a reminder that authority must always be balanced with accountability. For many people, the most disturbing part of the story was the contradiction. A judge who punished drug offenders was secretly breaking the same laws. That contradiction undermined trust in the fairness of the system. Jack Camp's fall was not violent or dramatic, but it was deeply symbolic. It showed that corruption does not always involve money or power struggles. Sometimes it involves personal choices made in secrecy. In the end, Jack Camp joined a small and troubling list of judges who went to prison for criminal behavior. His case stands as a warning that no title, robe, or courtroom can shield someone from the consequences of their actions. Number 7. Sonya McKnight. Sonya McKnight was a sitting judge in Pennsylvania. As a magisterial district judge in Dauphin County, she presided over cases involving criminal complaints, traffic offenses, and preliminary hearings. People who appeared before her were required to respect her authority. She was sworn to uphold the law and protect the public. Behind that authority, however, was a private life that would end in violence. McKnight had been in a romantic relationship with a man who later became the victim in her case. According to court testimony, the relationship was unstable and marked by tension. Over time, the man decided he wanted to end it. That decision would change both of their lives forever. In February 2020, the man was asleep inside his home. Sonya McKnight was there with him. What happened next was not an accident, and it was not self-defense. While he slept, McKnight picked up a gun. She shot him in the head at close range. The bullet caused catastrophic injuries. The victim survived, but he was permanently blinded in one eye and suffered serious physical and emotional damage. He later told investigators that he woke up in pain and confusion, not understanding why someone he trusted had tried to kill him. McKnight claimed the shooting was accidental. She said the gun discharged unintentionally. Prosecutors did not believe her. Investigators examined the scene and the evidence. They concluded that the shooting was deliberate. The angle of the gunshot, the circumstances, and the lack of any struggle contradicted McKnight's explanation. The victim had been asleep. He was defenseless. As police dug deeper, the case became more troubling. Because Sonya McKnight was a judge, her position complicated the legal process. Local prosecutors recused themselves due to conflicts of interest. The case had to be transferred and handled carefully to ensure fairness and transparency. For years, the case moved slowly through the system. McKnight remained free while legal motions and jurisdictional issues were resolved. During this time, she was suspended from the bench, but she still held the title of judge. The victim lived with the consequences every day. In 2024, the case finally went to trial. By that point, public interest was intense. A judge was now the defendant in a violent felony case. The courtroom dynamic was reversed. Prosecutors told the jury that this was a calculated act of violence. They argued that McKnight was angry over the breakup and acted out of control. They emphasized that the victim was asleep and posed no threat. The jury heard testimony from the victim, medical experts, and investigators. They learned about the permanent damage caused by the gunshot. They also heard how McKnight had access to firearms and understood the consequences of using one. The defense argued that the shooting was accidental. They claimed there was no intent to kill and asked the jury to consider McKnight's version of events. The jury did not accept that explanation. In April 2025, Sonya McKnight was found guilty of attempted murder and aggravated assault. The verdict sent shockwaves through Pennsylvania and beyond. A sitting judge had been convicted of trying to kill her partner. After the verdict, McKnight was immediately taken into custody. The judge who once decided bail and sentencing for others now faced those decisions herself. At sentencing, prosecutors asked for a lengthy prison term. They emphasized the seriousness of the crime and the abuse of trust involved. They argued that McKnight's position made her actions even more disturbing. A judge understands the law. A judge understands violence. A judge knows exactly what a gunshot to the head can do. The defense asked for leniency. They pointed to McKnight's lack of prior criminal history and her years of service. The court was not persuaded. The sentencing judge described the crime as shocking and intentional. The court emphasized that the victim survived by chance, not mercy. Sonya McKnight was sentenced to 13 to 30 years in state prison. As she was led away, the image was striking. A judge in handcuffs, a former symbol of authority now stripped of power. McKnight later resigned her judicial position. She was removed from the bench and permanently barred from serving as a judge again. Her law career was effectively over. The victim spoke publicly about the impact of the crime. He described living with permanent injury and emotional trauma. He said he trusted McKnight and never imagined she would harm him. Advocates for victims of domestic violence pointed to the case as a reminder that abuse can happen in any relationship, regardless of education, status, or profession. They emphasized that power and authority do not prevent violence. In some cases, they make it more dangerous. The case also raised serious questions about accountability within the justice system. Many asked how a judge accused of attempted murder remained free for years before trial. Others questioned whether ordinary defendants would have received the same treatment. For the public, the case was deeply unsettling. Judges are meant to represent fairness and restraint. Seeing one convicted of a violent crime shattered that image. Sonya McKnight's story is not about a legal mistake or a lapse in judgment. It is about a deliberate act that nearly cost a man his life. It is about power misused in the most personal and destructive way. Today, McKnight is no longer a judge. She is an inmate serving a long prison sentence. The courtroom authority she once held is gone. Her case stands as a reminder that no title, no robe, and no position places someone above the law. When judges commit crimes, the damage goes beyond individual victims. It harms public trust in the justice system itself. In the end, the system she once served judged her actions and found them unforgivable. Number 8. Thomas Maloney. Thomas Maloney was a powerful judge in Cook County, Illinois. He served on the Circuit Court in Chicago, one of the largest and busiest court systems in the United States. As a judge, Maloney handled serious criminal cases, including murder trials. Defendants, lawyers, and families trusted that his courtroom operated on fairness and law. Behind that image, however, justice was being sold. Maloney did not abuse his power in secret. He abused it openly, deliberately, and for money. His courtroom became a place where verdicts could be bought, and freedom depended not on innocence, but on cash. The corruption would eventually make Thomas Maloney one of the most notorious judges in American history. In the 1980s and early 1990s, Maloney was already known for his close relationships with criminal defense attorneys. Some lawyers had unusual access to him. Others seemed confident about outcomes long before trials ended. What no one publicly knew at the time was that Maloney was taking bribes. According to federal investigators, Maloney accepted large sums of money in exchange for fixing cases. These were not minor charges. These were murder cases, where lives hung in the balance. In one case, Maloney accepted bribes to throw a murder trial, ensuring that the defendant would be acquitted. In another, he accepted money to influence sentencing decisions. The amounts ranged from tens of thousands to well over $100,000. For Maloney, justice had a price. The corruption came to light after federal authorities began investigating organized crime and judicial misconduct in Chicago. Wiretaps, cooperating witnesses, and financial records slowly revealed the truth. One defense attorney, facing his own legal trouble, agreed to cooperate with the FBI. He secretly recorded conversations with Maloney. On the tapes, Maloney spoke openly about money, outcomes, and expectations. There was no misunderstanding. There was no doubt. The evidence was devastating. In 1993, Thomas Maloney was arrested and charged with racketeering, bribery, and conspiracy. The arrest of a sitting judge for fixing murder cases shocked the nation. Newspapers across the country reported the story. Public trust in the Cook County court system was shaken. At trial, prosecutors presented recordings, testimony, and financial evidence. Jurors heard Maloney discuss bribe amounts and case outcomes. They learned how verdicts were manipulated and how defendants walked free not because they were innocent, but because they paid. The defense argued that Maloney was being targeted unfairly. They claimed the recordings were taken out of context. The jury was not convinced. Thomas Maloney was found guilty on multiple federal charges. In 1994, he was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The sentence reflected the seriousness of his crimes. Fixing murder cases, prosecutors argued, did more than break the law. It endangered the public by allowing violent offenders to return to the streets. Maloney was removed from the bench and disbarred. His judicial career ended in disgrace. But the consequences of his actions did not stop with his imprisonment. Because of Maloney's corruption, several criminal cases had to be reviewed. Convictions were questioned, acquittals were re-examined. Families were forced to relive trauma, not knowing whether justice had ever been real. In one particularly disturbing case, a defendant acquitted through Maloney's corruption was later connected to additional violent crimes. This reinforced public outrage and fear. Thomas Maloney was released from prison after serving his sentence. However, his freedom did not last. In 2010, Maloney was sent back to prison after violating the terms of his supervised release. Prosecutors said he continued to show disregard for the law even after his conviction. He remained a symbol of extreme judicial corruption. The Maloney case became a defining example in legal education of how unchecked power can rot a justice system from the inside. Law schools, ethics panels, and judicial oversight committees frequently cite his case as a warning. For the public, the damage was deep. Judges are meant to be the final safeguard against injustice. When a judge sells verdicts, it destroys confidence not just in one courtroom, but in the entire system. Thomas Maloney did not make a mistake. He made a business out of corruption. His courtroom was not a place of law, it was a marketplace. Today, Thomas Maloney is remembered not as a judge, but as a criminal who wore a robe. His name is permanently tied to one of the worst judicial corruption scandals in U.S. history. His case stands as a reminder that the justice system depends entirely on integrity. When that integrity is lost, the consequences can be deadly. No title protected him, no robe saved him. In the end, the law he sold judged him instead. Number 9. Ronald Bodenheimer. Ronald Bodenheimer was a circuit court judge in West Virginia. As a judge, he handled serious criminal cases and had the authority to decide guilt, innocence, and sentencing. People who appeared before him believed they were receiving fair treatment under the law. What they did not know was that Bodenheimer was secretly selling his power. For Bodenheimer, justice was not guided by evidence or fairness. It was guided by money. The corruption began quietly. Behind closed doors, Bodenheimer entered into illegal agreements with criminal defense attorneys. Instead of ruling based on law, he accepted bribes in exchange for favorable outcomes in criminal cases. These were not small favors or minor rule bending. These were deliberate acts of corruption that affected real cases and real lives. According to federal investigators, Bodenheimer accepted cash payments to dismiss charges, reduce sentences, and influence case outcomes. Defendants who paid had an advantage. Those who did not were left to face the full force of the system. The judge's misconduct went on for years without detection. What ultimately exposed Bodenheimer was a wider federal investigation into corruption in West Virginia's judicial system. Investigators began noticing unusual patterns in case outcomes and financial activity linked to certain judges and attorneys. As they followed the evidence, Bodenheimer's name repeatedly surfaced. One defense attorney, facing legal trouble of his own, agreed to cooperate with authorities. He provided information about bribes paid to Bodenheimer and helped investigators understand how the system worked. The investigation uncovered clear evidence that Bodenheimer had repeatedly abused his judicial authority for personal gain. In 2008, Ronald Bodenheimer was arrested and charged with federal bribery and corruption offenses. The arrest of a sitting judge shocked the local community. Judges are expected to be the final line of integrity in the justice system. Seeing one accused of selling decisions deeply damaged public trust. Bodenheimer eventually pleaded guilty to the charges. His plea confirmed what investigators had uncovered. He admitted that he had accepted bribes and betrayed his oath as a judge. In court, prosecutors described his actions as a serious threat to the justice system. They emphasized that when a judge accepts bribes, every ruling becomes suspect. Innocent people may be punished, and guilty people may walk free. At sentencing, the court made it clear that Bodenheimer's position worked against him. Judges are held to higher standards because of the power they wield. Bodenheimer had violated that trust repeatedly. Ronald Bodenheimer was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. He was removed from the bench, disbarred, and stripped of his authority. The courtroom that once obeyed his rulings now judged him. After his conviction, the impact of Bodenheimer's actions continued to unfold. Cases he had handled were reviewed. Some defendants questioned whether their outcomes were legitimate. The integrity of the local court system was called into question. For the public, the case was another painful reminder that corruption can exist even at the highest levels of the justice system. It reinforced the idea that transparency and oversight are essential, even for judges. Bodenheimer served his prison sentence and was later released. His legal career, however, was permanently over. He would never again serve as a judge or practice law. Unlike some corruption cases involving large organizations or distant institutions, Bodenheimer's crimes were personal and local. They affected people who trusted their court and believed in its fairness. His case became part of a broader conversation about judicial accountability. Legal experts cited it as an example of why judges must be monitored just as closely as politicians or law enforcement officers. Ronald Bodenheimer did not lose his career because of a mistake or misunderstanding. He lost it because he chose to profit from his position. He chose money over justice. Today, his name is remembered not for fair rulings or years of service, but for betrayal. A judge who sold justice cannot escape history's judgment. His story stands as a warning. When the people entrusted with the law abuse it, the damage reaches far beyond one courtroom. In the end, the system he corrupted held him accountable. Number 10. Tracie Hunter. Tracie Hunter was a juvenile court judge in Hamilton County, Ohio. She made history in 2010 when she became the first African-American woman elected to that position. Her election was closely watched, widely discussed, and politically charged. Supporters saw her as a reformer. Critics questioned her conduct almost from the beginning. What followed was one of the most controversial judicial scandals in Ohio history. Hunter's time on the bench was marked by conflict. She clashed with court staff, county officials, and other judges. Accusations of misconduct began to surface, ranging from administrative problems to ethical violations. While many of these issues were debated publicly, one incident would ultimately end her judicial career. That incident involved her brother. According to court records, Tracie Hunter used her position as a judge to intervene in a legal matter involving her brother, who was facing possible consequences related to confidential court documents. Prosecutors said Hunter improperly accessed and handled sensitive juvenile court records and then took steps to protect her brother from discipline. The most serious allegations centered on backdating a court document. Prosecutors argued that Hunter intentionally backdated a judicial entry to create the appearance that a decision had been made earlier than it actually was. This action, they said, was done to interfere with an internal investigation and to shield her brother from accountability. Hunter denied wrongdoing. She claimed the situation was being misrepresented and argued that she was the target of political retaliation. She maintained that her actions were administrative in nature and not criminal. In 2014, Tracie Hunter was charged with multiple felony counts, including misuse of office. The case drew intense public attention, not just because she was a judge, but because of the racial, political, and personal tensions surrounding her tenure. The trial was closely watched. During the proceedings, prosecutors presented evidence showing that Hunter had accessed confidential records without authorization and had directed changes to court documents. Witnesses testified about unusual instructions and procedural violations. The defense argued that Hunter had been unfairly targeted and that similar actions by other judges had not resulted in criminal charges. They urged the jury to see the case in context, not as a crime, but as a political dispute. The jury disagreed. In 2014, Tracie Hunter was found guilty of one felony count of misuse of office. The remaining charges were dismissed or resulted in acquittals. but the single conviction was enough to carry serious consequences. Following the conviction, Hunter was removed from the bench. Her law license was suspended. However, sentencing did not happen immediately. Instead, the case entered a long period of appeals. For years, Hunter fought the conviction through the courts. She argued that the verdict was flawed and that she had been denied a fair process. Supporters protested outside courthouses. The case became a symbol for some of broader concerns about race, power, and justice. Despite multiple appeals, the conviction was upheld. In 2019, nearly 5 years after the verdict, Tracie Hunter was ordered to serve her sentence. She was sentenced to 6 months in jail. When Hunter arrived at the courthouse to begin serving her sentence, the moment became national news. As deputies attempted to take her into custody, she collapsed in the courtroom. Emergency responders were called, and she was taken to a hospital.
Number 3, you are to do 6 months in the Hamilton County Justice Center, credit 1 day. Mr. or Ms. Deputy can take her away.
The incident was widely broadcast and debated. After receiving medical treatment, Hunter was taken into custody and served her jail sentence. Her incarceration made her one of the rare judges in the United States to actually serve time behind bars for misconduct committed while in office. The case continued to divide public opinion. Supporters argued that she had been punished too harshly and singled out unfairly. Critics argued that the conviction was justified and necessary to protect the integrity of the judicial system. What is not disputed is the outcome. Tracie Hunter lost her judgeship. She lost her authority. She served time in jail. Her legal career was permanently damaged. The Ohio Supreme Court later disbarred her, preventing her from practicing law again. For the justice system, the case raised difficult questions. How should judges be held accountable? Where is the line between misconduct and crime? And how should courts handle cases involving political and personal conflicts? For the public, the case was unsettling. Judges are expected to avoid conflicts of interest at all costs. When a judge intervenes in a case involving a family member, trust is broken. Tracie Hunter's story is not one of violence or corruption for money. It is a story about power, boundaries, and the consequences of crossing them. She once held the authority to decide the futures of children and families. In the end, the system she served decided hers. Her case remains one of the most debated judicial prosecutions in modern Ohio history, and a reminder that even historic firsts do not place anyone above the law.